Today is joining me Dr. Gillian Kerr. Gillian is a senior fellow at the Smart Prosperity Institute and also an ecological economics consultant, working with Annapolis Royal in Nova Scotia and Edmonton, Alberta, both in Canada. Gillian is especially interested in understanding how we can support more manageable interactions between humans and the environment by understanding our interdependencies, the trade offs we make, and the opportunities to be more purposeful and informed. Julia, thank you so much to be today with me. I'm going to start with the first question that I'm going to ask. And for this first question, I'm going to quote the World Commission on Environment and Development related to the concept of sustainability. They define sustainability, and I quote, the development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. But Gillian, I would like to ask to you, from your own perspective, what does sustainability mean to you in your work and life?
Mm. Well, it's a great question because it's an old term, right? We're talking like the 90s when we started using this. And I would have to say one of the most disappointing things for me about the term was when I was working in Alberta, which I spent a lot of my career being based solely out of Alberta, Canada, which some of your listeners would probably know is the oil and oil sands capital of Canada and one of the biggest oil sands deposits in the world. And they used sustainability. They kind of took the term and said it's about sustaining development. So they flipped it backwards and talked about it from a sustaining development. And that always really bothered me because terms like sustainability are something that we can globally get behind. And sustainability has been around for long enough that we recognize that it on its own, as one term, is not enough. It's vague. It's when we start getting into details of what we mean by sustainability. What I think sustainability is um, has changed a bit in the last number of years. I grew up in a very small town. I lived half time in Nova Scotia and half time in Alberta. And the half time in Nova Scotia is where I grew up. And one of the things that has become more and more clear to me is that community, people sharing space and time, people sharing interests, people working together, people engaging in activities together because they share values. I think that that is the premise for sustainability. I think in our global economy that that has become so much about how much GDP a country is making, and people are buying things to make themselves feel better. We talk about consumerism as the way to make economies strong in North America. What we have lost over time that I've observed is we've lost community. I and so I think that sustainability is I mean the term is that you read is makes sense, right? It's about what we do today should not impact the needs and rights and opportunities and experiences of the people that are coming next, whether they're related to us or not. So our future community should not be impacted by what we're doing now. Now you say that every time we do anything, there's an impact, right? There's a trade-off. Like we breathe carbon dioxide, right? Like there are things we have waste. We build things. So I think that given where we are right now, in a climate emergency that is not going to go away, like we are. I just drove from Edmonton to Nova Scotia, and we had tornado warnings, fires and smoke, too much water, like the rain had come down and they were worried about a washout. So as I drove across a tornado warning in Montreal and out west, um, as I drove over 7 days from Edmonton to the East Coast, there is no way of escaping that we are in a climate emergency. So, so sustainability needs to be framed in the fact that we are in a climate emergency. So, is sustainability stop doing everything so that we can try to slow down the CO2 levels and slow down the temperature? No, that's not realistic. But what we can think of right now from a sustainability perspective is we have choices. We have good information that's available online. We have the ability to vote. And so I think with the choices we have now, Sustainability is us thinking about a community outside ourselves and hope and wanting the best for that community with the best education, information, and resources we have. That's the individual imperative. And so I do believe that community is the key to how we're going to survive the climate crisis and reframe what sustainability means in the future.
Now that you mentioned community and the importance of create this community and this help among the people, in your opinion, what do you consider are the biggest sustainability challenges or obstacles faced by individuals or organizations today to integrate this creation of community or to integrate sustainability in their daily
Mm.
life?
Well, I think I'm a Generation Xer, so it's definitely one of the biggest challenges is that people are getting their information selected from very specific sources. It's the fact that we choose to get information that reinforces our thoughts. So we are able to sit solely in our own echo chambers now without trying to learn or challenge what we think is true. And there's a lot of bad information being shared over Facebook, Instagram, all the different socials that are making it harder and harder to bring people together, and it makes it easier and easier for us to be us versus them. So I used to get very angry about this. And what I've recognized is that my anger is energy that could be spent in a very different place. So when I find people that I disagree with, and there's a lot of them, there's a lot of people I think that are making the wrong choices for a sustainable future. What I try to do now, legitimately, I try not to fake it. I try to take a deep breath and say, what do I have in common with those people? What do we care about together? Is it children? Is it the fact that, we need to have heat shelters now in cities where people can go to when the temperatures get high or the humidity gets high? Are there places where we can actually find common ground so that when we do start talking about something that we completely disagree about, like climate change, there's a kernel or a place where we could actually have a conversation that leads us to understanding that there are things happening that are impacting us both, that if we look at it, it's because of an increase in temperature. Yeah, and yes, we might argue that human made versus, natural or whatever, but the fact is that I think finding common ground is one of the key things because the world is kind of set up to separate us.
Yeah, it makes sense because at the end, social media sometimes polarized, right?
Yes. Mm,
Took
yes.
people apart, but what you suggest is a real and ground-based way or
Mm,
action to solve this problem. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. For the next question, I'm going to cite one of your publications in 2010, and this publication is Alberta's Drive to Use Market-Based Instruments for Ecosystem Services Provision. And as you cited, Rangathan et al., 2007, and Landscape Change Team, 2003, I'm going to ask, understanding ecosystem services as any positive benefit that wildlife or ecosystems provide to people, what do you consider should be the most relevant ways government should focus on reverse the negative trends of
mhm.
decreased ecosystem function?
Yeah, so I spent a lot of time thinking about this. So thank you for that question. Um, what I have learned, so I've been working on this stuff for I would say ecosystem services since probably 2008. But the idea of the trade-offs between the environment and the economy, or in the environment and other things that humans want to have. And what I think, what I've learned is you can't you have to meet someone or a government or an organization where they are. Like, we need to spend the time to understand where people are. So, for instance, I'm doing this work right now for the Southwest Nova Scotia Biosphere with Dr. Nick Hill. They've hired me to do some work on ecosystem services. And part of what the work is doing is that can have great science. We can understand that, by doing X, we end up with a negative outcome Y. We can talk about it, but pure natural science has had very little impact on changing policy directions, regulation, how companies operate. So then how do we change that? And that's why I think being an ecological economist is like a super cool job because it's kind of like trying to, and it's kind of like a jack of all trades or Jill of all trades, master of none, because what you're trying to do is integrate all the disciplines. We need the natural science. We need to know when we do X, we get Y, or at least that's what the science tells us we're going in that direction. We don't like that direction. But what we need to do is connect the science, the what's going on in the ecosystems to human behavior. And connecting it to human behavior means meeting people where they are. And so, for instance, in the Southwest Bioreserve, we're trying to get municipalities to integrate, the natural landscape and to recognize it as something to maintain, to cherish, to protect, like watersheds, forests, instead of looking at it as a natural resource to cut down and sell or to pave over and build new buildings or whatever. We're trying to connect them. So one of the big connections from municipality perspective is there are huge costs in municipalities. Municipalities are so squeezed right now with, like, we just had a number of flooding that takes out roads. The amount of cost for infrastructure alone for municipalities is becoming untenable. I don't know how municipalities are going to be able to do that. So why don't we go and talk to them about green infrastructure? Why don't we talk to them about the fact that we have these roads being wiped out is that we haven't looked after the watershed or the trees or the forest above it. So if we can meet people so they understand that if we work with nature, we can save money, we can create good long-term infrastructure, we can connect people with their environment so that everyone becomes a champion of the environment, not just a municipality and public works going to have to do it, but as a community, we will understand that looking after our watershed, our community forests, our whatever, actually has a benefit to us. And so, one of the criticisms of the ecosystem services, which will always be there, is that it is very human centered. It's about the benefits to us. And I say to people that don't like that are like, it's so selfish, it's all about us. Fine, but we're making these bad decisions all the time, regardless. So if we can connect people to the services of nature, yes, it's very anthropocentric, but if we don't do it, we are making bad decisions and destroying or harming or degrading our ecosystems every day because we're not connecting at all. So I know that's a long-winded, I spent a lot of time thinking about this, but we need to help people understand from both a biodiversity perspective and a climate mitigation and adaptation. Those are the two biggies right now that the world's governments are struggling with. We need to show people what's in it for them. Right? So the picture I don't know with the podcast if this is going to be just oral or not, or how it's going to work, but that picture is Royal Roads University behind me on my Zoom. That is my favorite place in the world. It is an old growth forest with walking trails and all kinds of flora and fauna. That to me is a place that I work hard to make sure that I'm involved with any kind of sustainability stuff happening at Royal Roads, because it is a gem for me culturally, for me, for my mental health, for my physical health, and then also from a watershed perspective, from a habitat perspective, from a soil, like it is a perfect ecosystem service habitat. And so what's in it for the people you're trying to engage? What's in it for the organizations you're trying to influence? What's in it for the governments that you're trying to help them to make decisions that use a cheaper model of integrating the environment into their decisions versus building concrete structures that get wiped out during the next flood?
Now that you mentioned that, and talking about the government and the actions they need to make and the education that is needed to be promoted, I found really interesting in another of your publications when you mentioned about the leadership issue pertain to the reported constant shift in government priorities. And sometimes this happens because the time they are in charge is not too long in matters of that needed in environmental or conservation that is needed to be done. Now, that my next question is this: how do you suggest that can be faced the balance in short-term considerations with long-term sustainability
Mm.
goals?
Well, it's a tough one because we've been working on this for 30 or 40 years, and with there are bright spots. Like there are places that have been leaders, so we can see there. We've got some templates to use. Um, to be honest, it's a difficult one. Like the political. So the reason I think it's more difficult is that politics seems to be attracting the wrong kind of people. Like my dad was a member of parliament federally, and he was an MLA provincially in Nova Scotia. And I spent my entire life growing up in a political family. Now I'm more left leaning than my dad, but still, I had an opportunity to spend a lot of time around politicians. And it seems like we've lost again, the common ground, the places where people are willing to work together so that it is us versus them. It's ugly. And so getting reelected is such a focus. And to get reelected, you're going to do whatever it takes to get reelected. And so making promises doesn't mean anything anymore, at times with politicians. But I do think there are things happening in such different areas right now. So, for instance, I did some work for Deloitte, and a colleague of mine, Geneva Clausen, she's this incredible woman that I used to work with when I was first at Alberta Environment. She was working with a think tank based out of Calgary, and we were working on ecosystem services way back when, in like 2007, 2006. And what Deloitte has been part of is developing an accounting system to allow big corporations and big business to actually measure what they choose to do as far as procurement, where they're buying things, their activities like their staff travel, what products they actually create, to actually account for their climate footprint and then also their nature footprint. So that's happening from an industry perspective. And we can talk about greenwashing and all the rest of it. But the fact is that when it comes to even changes, like let's say in the oil sands in Alberta, a company like Shell is not just listening to the UCP government, the United Conservative government in Alberta, and taking their cues from them. They're a global player and they see what's happening. So while Alberta might be still pushing and like, let's do more oil and gas, when the rest of us, we know that's the wrong thing to do. We need to be carbon neutral. We need to get off of oil and gas, that addiction. Shell's already they're divesting. I'm not saying that they're not angels. Like companies need to be held to account, but they're divesting into, non-renewable or into renewable energy. They're changing how they even do their profile with oil and gas. They can see the writing on the wall. We cannot sustain our humanity and the biodiversity, the animals, the life, everything in the world if we maintain this kind of addiction on oil. So sometimes it comes from an economic reality. They can see that they want to be economic leaders, and so they see that this is what's happening. They listen to the science. But sometimes I think it comes from you know the bottom up. We need to have citizens that are engaged and understand. And so that's why I would say what I've observed is at the municipal government level, it's a lot easier at that level to engage with your counselors because you live in the same town as them. Your kids go to the same swimming pool with them. When you start getting up provincially and then federally, it's harder to connect with those politicians. But I do think that organizational change, like that right now, the municipal natural asset initiative that's happening in Canada, where the Canadian Federation of Municipalities, they have been working on helping municipalities across Canada understand what their natural assets are. What are what's their natural capital? What are ecosystems that they have? And start try to integrate those. So that's not, me as an ecological economist saying this is the right thing to do. This is a group that works for municipalities saying this is the right thing to do. It's good to know what your ecosystem health is, what your forests are like, what your wetlands, because that's going to be useful to you going forward. So there's no one answer. The political system is not helpful with 3 to 4 year terms. So it has to be from every other strategic way so that a politician just can't say no. They're like, oh, well, I might want to tear down this wetland and build a Costco, but we're hearing this from all these different sides that those wetlands are really beneficial. Like we need to keep them. So I think that while the political cycle is not ideal, um, hearing it from organizations, companies, from citizens is going to help politicians make the right decision.
And makes totally sense because, okay, people in the government, they only have just a few years to serve in that position, but the people are in there longer, right? The
Mhm, mhm,
citizens. And I can find great how now you are connecting back to the first answer related to community, right?
mhm, mhm,
Because we don't just need to wait until the government makes something for us. We need to find the ways to create action from
mhm,
our position as
mhm,
citizens, right? With that in mind, I would like to ask, now that we understand the importance of create this community and the impact, because again, the citizens will be there longer than the leaders
yeah,
in that position. What do you consider from the government side should they do to motivate people to keep contributing, to
mm.
be part of this conservation or community that is so needed?
Well, it's interesting because I'm also just tomorrow I head back to Mongolia, where I'm working on a contract with Alinea International. We've got a $10 million project for 5 years from being funded by the Global Affairs Canada, and we're working on trying to reverse the degradation of the steppe and the grasslands, so the foothills, and you know part of part of what needs to happen is that, and this comes from my PhD as well, like the research is that there are many different concepts we can talk about, but in essence the ones that really make sense to me are legitimacy, accountability, and trust. If a group of people, if you can build trust, which can be easily destroyed, but if you can build trust with a group of people, that is a massive milestone right there. If you can do a process that's considered legitimate, that people can understand why, that it makes sense that you're focusing on conserving wetlands, or you know maybe it's a change in agricultural policy, that we want agriculture but we want it to be greener. If there's a legitimacy in the process and you have trust, then you're going to have people be more willing to engage. And then the final one is accountability. We do all this planning, we have all these ideas. Who's ultimately accountable? So when something doesn't happen that we say was going to happen, who is accountable for that? Because with a lack of accountability, we can have all these great dreams and plans, but when they don't happen and no one's held accountable, people lose faith in the process. They start to consider the process not legitimate anymore, and they lose trust. So there are many different ways of bundling things like intention, or like there's so many different governance words, but for me in my PhD looking at the implementation gap of using market-based instruments for environmental outcomes in Alberta, the things that resonated with me were about, if you're going to engage people, you need to have trust. You need to have a trusted agent. You don't maybe people don't trust the government, but they do trust the government people that are in their town, because those people know things. So trust, legitimacy, and accountability, I think, are three things that should be mandatory to start with when you want to engage citizens and have them willingly come to the table.
Thank you so much. And I want to ask if you can share your hopes and aspirations for integrating all these sustainability and conservation practices
Mhm.
into daily living.
Mhm. Well, I like that you focused on that because I've been spending a lot of time with my own concept of climate grief. Like I have found the last couple of years really hard because for years I was working in theory, right? Things are going to get bad. We are going to see the impacts of climate change. We're going to see the suffering that comes with climate change, and it's happening now. It's happening everywhere. No one is not being impacted by climate change now. No matter what you think the cause is, it's happening. And I mean, I'm 52, so I'm not one of the millennials or the people that are growing up with loss, right? Like we talk about the good old days, like when we had like lots of snow all winter, and now in Annapolis, we're in Nova Scotia, we don't get many long snowy days anymore. So I feel like you can't hide. Part of the going to hope and integration is being really honest about where we're at. And so I do have to spend time on mental health things because it can get very overwhelming. And so being honest about that, I think the other thing that I have learned is being my age and with the experience I have, when I share my concerns and fears with younger people, I think that's part of making the connection. That's part of looking for solutions. That's part of sharing um, in a very vulnerable way to build trust, to build relationships. And so, again, I know I keep coming back to community, but I do think the more opportunities that we have to engage with people, Margaret Mead, I know I'm going to get it wrong, but I've been using, everyone uses this saying, but it's like basically the only thing that's ever led to significant long-term change is the act of a few dedicated people working together. And I truly believe that. I believe that we don't have to work at the global scale. There's lots of people doing that. Being home in my hometown, being able to work on projects that are dealing with, sea level rise is going to turn the town of Annapolis Royal by 2100 into a series of islands. Like that's the science. And so, what can we do to inform, to educate, to be realistic about how scary these questions, these issues are, and then to look for solutions. So I think that scale is important. I'm choosing more and more to work at a smaller scale, at least personally. I'm not on as many big, committees anymore. I find it more for me. It's more rewarding to work in a place where you actually can go out into the soil or go out into the water or go out, and see your neighbors at the market. So that's quite rewarding for me. I think the other thing is giving grace to people is important because we are all coming at this in the best way we can. And, we've talked a little bit about the echo chambers and like where people are getting their information from. That's not an individual's fault. That's a systemic problem that, that people are making lots of money off of this problem. And so Facebook's not going to change this because they're making money off it. But that doesn't mean that young people aren't growing up thinking that that's where information comes from and that the media are all crooked. And so I think for me, I don't know if I was ever on a high horse. I don't know if I ever thought I was morally superior to anyone, but I definitely now, when I get angry about what someone's doing or what a government decision is, I try to feel it and let go of it and say, what can I do to interact with it, to engage people? And I think the other thing that I've learned is there's no one and done. Like there's no big check mark we're going to get for saving the planet. This is all about um, building relationships, building trust, finding ways of legitimately moving together, holding account. People that are accountable need to be held to account. And I know that that's kind of my PhD in a couple of sentences, but I also think we need to keep our eyes open, our ears open to listen, to truly listen to others, and also to recognize that we might need to pivot. So something that I feel is deeply held right now as right might be something I need to let go of or modify because I want to meet people where they're at. I want to help be part of a solution. So therefore, I need to let go of maybe my own stakes in the sand that this is the right way. And I think, and honestly, some of that I think comes with maturity. 20 years ago, when I was, in my early 30s and was like, was more ferocious about how I did things. I'm not sure if I was more powerful or impactful then, but I know now that um, you know, this is we're all on this planet together. Like that's one thing we all have in common.
And reaching to the end of this interview, thank you so much, Gillian. Do you have any suggestions or concerns about sustainability practices that
Mm.
we may have missed during the interview?
Mm. Well, I do think one thing that one piece of advice that has been given to me that I would give to anybody else is to ask questions. Like don't assume something. If someone says they've got a green process, don't just assume it's a green process. Ask questions. And I think the more we ask questions, the more we learn, the more we're able to use what we just applied to maybe detergent or to organic, whatever, blah, blah, blah food. The more we ask those questions, the more we are going to apply that as we go forward. Our brains, we're going to be a bit more inquisitive. We're not going to take everything at face value. Now, with that being said, people are busy and tired. So there's a thing called heuristics, right? Like when you go into the grocery store, when I go in the grocery store and there are 20 types of peanut butter, I usually go for one because I don't have time to do the trade-off analysis and understand. So we make shortcuts because there's just too much going on. We have too many things to do. So I think recognizing that we do make shortcuts because we need to get stuff done in the day and we're all too busy, I think is an important thing to remember. That what's the reason you're choosing something? And so if you can ask questions more, like instead of just taking things at face value all the time, ask some questions and then also test why you're making the decisions you are or why you've made that choice all the time. Because I think we sometimes just get in these patterns where we don't get a chance to look out and see what other options there are, what other pathways there are, what other people could we be engaging with. So again, I think it all comes back to community. I do think that we are heading into times that are unprecedented. And I think the benefit is that there's no part of the world that's not being impacted. So it's a global phenomenon. Some places are being more negatively impacted than others, but we are collectively in this climate crisis, biodiversity crisis, social stability crisis when you look at what's going on around the world. And so that is our shared experience, and that is someplace to start from, I think.
Thank you so much. And I'm going to highlight something that you just mentioned. Ask, right? Question even yourself the decision you're making. Why are you making those decisions? Because at the end, if we learn to ask questions, we're going to have more wisdom to learn more, right, about the thing we're doing and why we're doing it. Thank you so much, and again for all your recommendations and for inspire us.
Bye for now.
Bye.